Hello, and welcome to Klimatic Scale. My name is Dash. Industries at the heart of our economy need to change to stay competitive, and we need them to change for the planet to thrive. In Klimatic Scale, we focus on examples of what actually works. And in this Venture Tools chapter, we unpack the most effective ways corporates work with startups. Our guest today is Gregor Gimmy, known as the father of venture clienting. Gregor has spent years helping corporates stop bleeding their budgets out. No need to die for the technologies you can just buy. Hello, Gregor. Great to have you here.
Hello, and Ash, thanks for inviting me.
Can you please tell a bit about yourself?
Okay. It was a late 2014 when I was working at BMW in the area of innovation strategy, where I came up with the term venture client, and I developed a methodology, which is today known as venture clienting. So I could be called the person who brought to life venture clienting as a new practice or as a new corporate venturing methodology thing. In 2015, I created the first fully dedicated venture client unit. It was quite successful. And here's where, during my time at BMW, I was also approached by various companies. What is that? And so, can you help me? And here's why I thought there is a need in corporations beyond BMW. And here's where I decided to create 27 Pilots, a company that would help corporations to set up and also run venture client units. And 27 Pilots then started working for BMW as an external support to running their venture client unit, but we also set up and supported till today venture client units from Bosch, Open Bosch, Airbus, Siemens Energy, Otto, Doc6. So many of the venture client units today that are out there that are also the pioneers of this were then really supported and set up by 27 Pilots. And my company was acquired by Deloitte in early 2023. So, and I left 27 Pilots in Deloitte. I think there's some need for some deeper academic research. There's a lot of academic research already happening, actually, really worldwide. These are teaching and lecturing, but there's still a lot of work to do to define really the foundational theories around venture clienting. Today, there's really very little, if any, really relevant publication that publishes solely and exclusively about venture clienting. It's often a topic of startup collaboration, for example, which I think is basically wrong. It's a wrong thinking. And this is one of my immediate goals, and those I may start another company in the world of venture clienting, still exploring.
Oh, wow. So you have been creator and active practitioner for 10 years, and now you're moving more to the academic world.
Maybe also a point about my background. I started my career really very early on in consulting. I did a lot of innovation strategy, innovation management consulting, also in Silicon Valley. Then I changed to the world of entrepreneurship. After many years in Silicon Valley, I worked in Silicon Valley at IDEO. I worked established startups, my own startups. So I knew the ecosystem quite well. And then I came back to the world of corporate. I didn't come to BMW and nobody told me, define a new model of corporate venturing. I joined BMW in a function that had nothing to do with startups, but working in a big corporate at BMW. And in a way, all my experiences in the Valley came together. Here, I noticed within BMW, to my surprise, that BMW was really missing out on startup technologies. I called this the startup gap, right? Every corporate has a lot of technologies, but they're often not using the best technology or the most state-of-the-art technology. Imagine like a company uses fax instead of email just because nobody told them about emails, right? So they're still communicating, but it's a much less efficient method. What I saw in the corporate world is that there were technologies out there that were much more advanced, that were being developed by startups. And then I came back to the world of corporate. Those would sooner or later substitute all the technologies within the corporate setting, but corporates were just too slow to adopt those technologies in a bigger number and faster. And this really then gave birth to my thinking. We need a model, we need a way of adopting those cutting edge technologies faster and more effective.
What was your thinking somehow influenced by the fact that you were working in Silicon Valley and in US? Your experience seeing how fast corporates work with startups there?
I would think that the most relevant factor that makes Silicon Valley work is the fact that there are great venture clients.
Oh.
People debate about why Silicon Valley is so successful, why do they continuously churn out the best startups and best technologies. My hypothesis is the ability of large corporations to adopt startup technologies. Apple, Google, Intel, Cisco, no matter what big company you look at, Oracle, NVIDIA, or an Apple, you see the very same pattern. They all are extremely good at leveraging external startup technologies.
And would you consider that now venture clienting is in a way an external R&D for companies?
I would say that companies all across the world have always worked with external companies within the R&D process. In 1965, BMW was working with external R&D departments. This is nothing new, right? In innovation. So the ability and the acknowledgement that to work with other external companies is relevant. Now, BMW, for example, has somewhere around 100,000 suppliers. Walk through the R&D department at BMW, which is about 15,000 people in Munich. When you go, for example, for lunch, right? You wear a badge that has a special banner. That's a supplier. That's an external, like a Bosch, for example, or a Siemens, or an NVIDIA, or a Cisco, or a consulting company, right? There is thousands and thousands of external companies that provide technology so that BMW can innovate cars. So this is not new, right? Now what's new is including startups into that ecosystem of external companies that you adopt startup from as a, let's say, supplier, or that you adopt technology from as an acquirer, right? Sometimes you would obviously acquire your suppliers because you want to be the exclusive user or the exclusive client, right? So now if you compare Silicon Valley companies with European companies, look at the proportion of companies that a Google or Apple acquires that come from the startup ecosystem, that are basically venture-backed companies, and compare that with any European company, you would see that this is a huge difference. So when you ask how many startups have you acquired, Apple is close to 100%.
Wow.
They really basically just buy startups. Look at Microsoft, same thing. It's way over 75%. Always defined as I acquire a company that has been born in the startup ecosystem, meaning it was venture-backed or is currently venture-backed, so pre-exit or post-exit, right? So what we're seeing is the difference in Silicon Valley to Europe is that the proportion of startups that are part of your technology landscape is much bigger. But in terms of, let's say, competitive edge it gives you, as a car company, you would buy glass from a normal glass manufacturer. Glass doesn't really sell you more cars. What sells you more cars is a better charging system for your battery, right? With a better charging system will probably come from a startup. And that's really the difference.
Do you believe basically venture clienting should exist on its own and it's a more sustainable model, and acquiring the startups should be more of an exception?
My definition of venture clienting is the following. The venture client is a company that adopts startup technology through purchasing and M&A.
So you include M&A in venture clienting.
So the concept of venture clienting is that you as a company position yourself as a user of startup technology, not as the investor. So you're on the demand side of the equation, not on the supply side. Venture capitalist is on the supply side. You are the bank of the startup. Now, the venture client is on the demand side. The venture client is the market. And define your model of venture clienting as big as you want or as small as you want. You could, for example, say, I only buy from startups as suppliers and I only buy for logistics, nothing else. Or you could say, venture clienting is a strategic function. And because startups are such a relevant element for my competitiveness, and that's why the venture client unit is responsible for everything from startup intelligence, trend research, to validation, piloting, up to all kinds of adoption activities, whether it's a long-term suppliership, whether it's a co-development, whether it's an M&A, whether it's a combination of all those. So that's really similar to, let's say, any other business function, right? There are companies who have a big design department. And where design plays a very important role in the competitiveness, for example, in a car company or furniture company or what have you, right? Other companies also design their products, but it's a much lower role, right? So the design department is much smaller, and the same with venture clienting. It can be very small, it can be very big, it can also not exist, because obviously your user company could also say, I don't care about startups, I don't touch them for whatever reason.
But you also mentioned in one of the previous interviews that you were frustrated with things as they were. What is this list of frustrations?
So when we talk about external startups, I always talk about external startups and not talk about internal startups, which I think, by the way, is an oxymoron anyway, but that's a different, maybe a topic. So if it's about external startups, the prevalent model, and let's put them under the term corporate venturing models, is corporate venture capital and corporate accelerators.
Yeah.
Now, both have inherent limitations that no matter how good you are, will always be a limitation. It's like saying a dog cannot fly, right? No matter what you do, right? Now, do I want my dog to fly? Yes or no?
And how much you're gonna pay for this limitation to be overcome?
And by the way, no matter how much you pay for a dog, it will never fly. So what were my requirements? So my requirement was not, I want to do a better corporate venture capital. My requirement was corporate venture capital is a tool, what for?
Yeah.
And coming from Silicon Valley and being surprised about how many CVCs you would find in Europe and how little CVCs you would find in Silicon Valley. Apple doesn't have a CVC, never had a CVC, correct? So why doesn't Apple have a CVC and everybody else, right?
Yeah.
So Facebook have a CVC and everybody else, correct? I thought, what do we really need this tool to do? What are the requirements? And then let's figure out if the tools we have work, or if they don't work, can they be actually improved or do we need to find something totally different? One of the main requirements is that you need access to the very best startups. So now here's the first inherent limitation of corporate venture capital. VC is always, in a way, exclusive. So if you're a corporate VC, you will even be in a lesser position to be allowed to invest, because if the startup is really good, they may not even want a corporate shareholder, or another corporate has invested, so you are excluded. So that by itself was an inherent limitation where I thought we cannot base the future of technology at BMW on corporate venture capital, because the better the startup, the less the tool works.
Yeah.
And obviously, startups are
the accelerators, it seems to be the same challenge. Also, not the best startups often go there, but a bit the lost ones.
Exactly, which is, by the way, 99.9%.
Yeah.
Correct. So the thing is, and it's a bias, right? The corporate thinks that every startup wants my money, which is totally wrong, because the really good ones don't want your money. Try to invest in OpenAI. Not only do I need to bring in the best startup technologies, also need to be able to fill really all the gaps I have. So how many startups do I need? Or Other question is, how many problems do I have in a company where technology is a solution, but this technology is not readily available? So a company like BMW or any other big corporate depends on technology throughout its value chain. You need technology for recruiting. You need technology for R&D, for logistics, for sustainability. Technology is just a critical element. You cannot be sustainable just by writing a good sustainability paper or strategy. You need technology. You need to get the CO2 out of the product or the air or whatever, right? So for that, you need technology. So technology is critical. Now, what I saw is that the amount of startups that would have a solution to a critical problem others do not have is huge, in the thousands.
Yeah, it's already.
Exactly. So what I did back then is I went to the CVC guys and said, we need to invest in more startups. Academically, empirically researched, the amount of startups being invested by CVCs per year is 2.8.
2.8. Wow.
Let's call it 3. Out of those investments, if you invest in a startup, you still don't have access to the technology, right?
VCs know it. It's a betting game. And with the small amounts of investment, your bets are riskier for a startup.
But it's also the corporate venture capital, by definition, is not scalable. Every VC that would have a limited portfolio, there are a few exceptions like a Y Combinator who invests in, 300 companies per year. But if you look at the later stages of investment, the Series A, B, and so on, then whatever VC you look at, whether it's in Silicon Valley or whether it's here, we're all talking about 5 to 20 startups per year, with exception of some very big VCs. So what my insight was, venture capital is not scalable. So corporate venture capital, problem number one, startups will be hard to invest. So I will not be able to invest in every startup I want. Second, if I want to bring in 100 startups per year, it doesn't work because I'm limited to somewhere around a handful. And now comes the third, and that's probably the biggest, let's say, design limitation of corporate venture capital is by owning equity, business-wise, you don't automatically have access to the technology. It's two different business processes. So if, let's say, your need is for a better, camera in your smartphone, if you would buy Apple shares, you wouldn't get the phone, right? You walk into the shop and say, I just bought some shares of Apple. I have a minority stake. It's non-controlling. Please give me your iPhone. And it says, thanks for investing in my company, the iPhone. That's another transaction that you have to do, right? The venture capitalist does a transaction of equity, not the technology transfer. And here's why I thought it's really what we're doing with corporate venture capital is we're investing in startups in hope of then triggering a purchase. And that happened, statistically speaking, only about 10% of the time. The percentage of really strategic partnerships where the product of the startup, the technology of the startup ends up doing good to a corporate process or product, way below 100%. So it's very ineffective. If you invest in 10 startups, maybe 2 or 3.
Then it's something like one technology actually deployed in 3.5 years, more or less.
So what I saw is that, and this was really then what triggered me to think corporate venture capital is a dog. What we need is a bird. And no matter what I do to the dog, it will never fly. It at best will jump, but it won't really meet the requirements that I have on the corporate side. There are very few corporates or CEOs who would say, I need 100 startups per year. They don't say that. We need to, and corporate venture capital is not allowing us to access the best because the best allow us to invest. It's not scalable. So if we can invest in a handful, and then if we invest, we still haven't really solved the problem, which is deploying the technology so that it makes our products more competitive.
I imagine you coming to the business management and telling you cannot kick the dog into flying. This is not the right way. I believe this is the better way. What were the reactions? How did you convince those who didn't believe you straight away?
In BMW, it was actually fairly simple because the people I talked to were the people who were most pragmatic about the need for startups. And that was really the people in R&D. And I basically said, look, this is just a much cheaper way of accessing the very best startups, and it's much faster and it's much lower risk. And then the answer was, let's give it a try. Let's see how it works. The colleagues in the CVC department, they were pretty neutral.
Really?
Saying, who the fuck are you? It's like, we're the guys who are sitting on 200 million and what's your budget? Like,
Exactly.
So, yeah,
that's not me. It sounds very
it wasn't negative. It was just basically
dismissive.
well, depending on were one or two guys in the CVC group of BMW who were extremely cooperative. Others were just very, basically, this guy is not important because I have more money than he has. But then it started to scale.
Yeah.
It started to work. And we started to see that a big amount. So today we're looking at plus 50 per year. So we're going from a handful over X10 at a fraction of the cost. I would think that any CVC office in Silicon Valley costs more in rent than most venture client units.
So, for example, those people who were dismissive or were not believing, did they feel threatened by this success?
At BMW, nobody was threatened. Nobody felt threatened, but not because of you've read The Innovator's Dilemma, right? Christensen, and it's like when a new solution appears, the incumbents kind of look at it and say, this is too small, this will never really work. Don't feel threatened till the moment it hits them in the face. When I published this article in the Harvard Business Review, so in 2017, right, or 2016, I was approached by a few professors and they said, what you're doing is really interesting. Let's write a paper about this now. And then we sat together and we wrote an article. Back then I was more cautious in today I'm much more convinced that it's really a substitute, not a complement. But when this thing got published, I would say I nearly got fired because I didn't present this paper to anybody in BMW, and obviously you. And then the CVC guys felt really that what I wrote in this article was wrong, misrepresenting the value of corporate venture capital.
Their work for years, right? We observed quite a bit that the budget size and the activities also can be connected not only with status, but with identity. And that's where it can really be a very tough hit.
But today we're seeing actually a few companies that are really combining this, Robert Bosch with Robot Venture Capital, and venture client and venture capital running separately. They're running independently from each other.
Just yesterday, I heard a really cool example of basically a corporate getting a startup through their venture clienting department, and then realizing that they will need more investment for the deployment, and being one of the investors then in their next round through their CVC. Do you think this is also something can functionally work, or they should stay separate?
It can work, but I would question that it's really necessary. So first of all, the question is if the investment of the corporate is a threat to the startup in the long term. I've seen numerous cases where a corporate said, I will not buy the technology of that startup because my competitor invested. What does this do to the startup in its ability to acquire more clients? If that is threatened, then I'm also killing my investment, right? The startup sooner or later will suffer, and that would be a negative. If my investment in the startup does not trigger any limitations to the startup, then it's purely a financial transaction. And then I would say I'd rather give my money as an LP to a VC rather than myself, doing it myself. But then again, what also needs to be considered, and that's often not known, is that after a venture client activity, if the corporate invests, this investment is often not really a CVC investment. So often those investments are investments and they come from a corporate, but it's not corporate venture capital. They are tied to some strategic rights, which declassifies them as corporate venture capital. So you should obviously, and that's often a mistake that's done, is to say every time money or capital flows from the corporate startup, it's automatically corporate venture capital. No, it's not. Corporate venture capital is always a non-controlling minority stake. CVC would do. There's no change of control. There's no investor has specific rights over the other investors. So everybody is equal.
Yeah.
And only when an investor comes in that says, I want to have, for example, a first right of refusal in the case of acquisition, right? I want to have some special rights. Then this is where you would be talking about a strategic investment, but it's not a CVC investment. But it's falsely labeled as CVC.
Yeah. So right now it's almost 10 years after you basically introduced venture clienting. And we can see that currently CVC industry is in decline. At least this is what I've heard from many people from the industry. And also other tools. Also, there are less corporate accelerators, certain elements of like innovation theater, when innovation is used more like as a marketing tool, also in decline. Where do you see currently corporate innovation moving towards, and specifically venture clienting field?
Okay. Given my many years of working in the field of innovation, I see startups not as a solely tool for innovation. I position it as a competitive tool. Why? Because first of all, I don't want to run into the discussion of, is this innovation or not? Oh, we are not here to innovate because we need to cut costs. When I look at startups as a cutting edge provider of technologies, what does technology do? Technology, most and foremost, is something that helps you cut costs. Many more startups for manufacturing, for car technology, right? My understanding, most startups have technology that allows you to reduce cost rather than innovate products. So the users, or what I call the venture clients inside a corporation, are predominantly not the innovation department. It's any other department in need of technology. Oh, I need cybersecurity in my IT. Well, the security guy is not the innovation guy, it's the cybersecurity guy, right? And he knows that if there is a hacker attack and he missed out on good technology to prevent, that person will have a problem. But this person is not the innovation department. The innovation department is often a very limited, special type of team, and with a dedicated budget, which is extremely small to overall budget. But I said startups are not just there to support innovation, they're also here to support any other area where technology plays a role. My argument for the growth of venture clienting is because of the growth for the need of cutting edge technology across all industries. So compare the amount of technology in a car today compared to 20 years ago.
Yeah, the amount is overwhelming.
Compare the amount of technology you needed in an insurance company 20 years ago compared to today. A financial system, right? For example, in cement, like we have long worked for the world's biggest cement company, Holcim. Way back when, there was no technology in cement. It was going to the pit, getting the stuff out, and then trucking and shipping it somewhere with some diesel truck. But today, the need for technology, just because of the CO2 regulations, is huge. But this is not the innovation department with that. So and that's also a recommendation to me to startups. Don't go to companies and say you are an innovation tool. Just tell them, I fill your technology gaps, and by filling those technology gaps, I help you save money. Now, don't go into that discussion whether every startup has to be innovative, because if you're not unique and different to the rest of your competitors, then you won't even get venture capital, right? But your target market is in most cases not the innovation department, really whoever is the end user of your technology.
Yes, that's a great piece of advice to the startups. My very last Very small question to you. What is one trend in venture clienting that you think corporate clients and startups are not aware enough of?
I think startups and VCs are still not aware about many things about venture clienting. I think they're like at kindergarten level, right?
Yeah.
On the corporate side, it's a little bit better because it started at BMW, right? Because many big corporates are. So here's what I still see that it's not being recognized in the corporate level. It's that this is really a business function that requires a high hierarchical positioning in the organizational chart. So if you look today at, I don't know, IT, the IT function, if you go from company to company and ask, who is the highest manager in IT, you would quite frequently find a C-level person. I'm the chief innovation, I'm the chief information officer. So it's a C-level or it's a senior vice president level. Person who does one and one thing only, which is IT. There is still no single person on that level really responsible for venture clienting. So the venture client unit in the organizational chart is still too much at the bottom. I think it's working its way up, just like in 1965. The guy in charge of IT was the intern, right?
Yeah.
In 1968, there was like the guy who studied computer science and somehow got lost in the finance department. And then, but the same with every business function, marketing, same thing. 1920, there was no marketing guy sitting in the board. So I see the strength that this venture client function to provide and enable companies to benefit strategically from the startup ecosystem. It will grow in its organizational hierarchy. Through that, it will get more budget. Through that, it will have a broader responsibility. So often we see venture client units that are basically just glorified scouting.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we've also encountered a lot. It's part of the innovation team. There is this one person who's basically in charge of startup scouting. And yeah, that's venture clienting.
So the way, it's very easy, you measure the relevance of a function in a company by the budget the person in charge has. So if you go to innovation department and there is Jane or Joe says, I am the head of venture clienting, the question is, what's your budget?
Yeah.
And then you will still find budget. I don't have a budget, correct? It means very unimportant. If you go to the W Startup Garage, which is really still today dedicated to venture clienting, it grew in terms of budget and people significantly from the time that I started it. By my thinking already back then, and that was really part of my model. Model was not to say, I'm the guy in the innovation department, I will start scouting startups. I said, no. I said, if we really want to be good venture clients, meaning we want to be able to close that startup gap, be a separate department. To have a separate website, a separate brand. It needs a distinct process and methodologies. It needs a team that does venture clienting and nothing else. And so what I think that the future of venture clienting is that across corporates, it will become ever more strategic. And you also see this, for example, by the fact that Deloitte acquired 27 Pilots, consultancy. You see PwCs offering venture client solutions. Companies like Carney are looking into that. I think BCG and McKinsey will be the next ones that will start offering venture clienting as a consulting offering to support C-level in setting this up. Today, they're still ignoring it a little bit. They're avoiding the term. I think sooner or later they will. And I think the latest report from Wharton, I'm not sure if you saw that, the latest report, 2025, a report from Wharton on corporate venturing. Interestingly, it picks up on venture clienting and it mentions venture clienting as one of the four basically main vehicles for corporate venturing next to CVC. But interestingly, it also states that venture clienting is faster and cheaper. And I think if you look at the history of humanity, we will always see that globally, faster and cheaper kills slower and more expensive.
Yes, that's so true. That's wonderful.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. We're everywhere. See you next time.